In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davis. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello friends, welcome to the show. Today's guest is Sonia Clarke, a collaboration designer, facilitator, writer, yoga and meditation teacher, and the founder of Clever Manka. With more than 2 decades of experience helping organizations communicate, think, and work better together, Sonia brings a unique blend of corporate expertise and human-centered leadership. Her career spans senior leadership roles, including director at PwC's Future of Work practice and leader of its creative communications business, where she worked with organizations navigating change, transformation, and the evolving world of work. Prior to that, she spent more than 10 years in public relations, advising some of the world's most recognized brands and institutions like Coca-Cola. And today, Sonia focuses on helping individuals and organizations strengthen collaboration, connection, and collective intelligence in an increasingly complex and AI-enabled world. She's the author of the Collective Code newsletter and is currently writing a book of the same name, which I am anticipating with excitement. I can't wait to read it when it's done. It's about exploring the human skills that will matter most as technology continues to reshape how we live and work. Welcome to the show, Sonia.
Thanks so much for having me, Ange.
I'm so excited to talk to you about all things future of work, ways of work, how we work well together. You've really spent your entire career helping people work better together. What do you think most organizations still get wrong about collaboration?
It's such a good question. I think the number one thing is most organizations, most people think that collaboration will just happen. Like you can just kind of throw people in a room or a Google Doc and it will just happen. And it's such a common misconception that good collaboration is almost always intentionally designed. And people think that collaboration is people being in the same meeting or working on a Google Doc together, when we've all been in really bad meetings and we've all been in those Google Docs where people are just having those passive aggressive little comment wars on the side.
The little side comments with no actual action, just like incorrectly spelt. You're like, well, that doesn't really help. Thanks.
Yes, exactly. And there's always the people that are in there at 3 a.m. just going on this kind of vigilante mission through the comments. So I think it's something that a lot of them don't take seriously because they actually just don't understand how you can create the conditions for good collaboration.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I worked at one of the big banks, there was actually an APRA review into the culture off the back of the Royal Commission. And one of the recommendations was actually that the culture was too collaborative and that people wouldn't call out issues, mistakes, and it was actually leading to more risk. I'd love your take on that. Do you think that sometimes organizations can be over collaborative?
It's really interesting. I don't know if collaborative is the right word. There's a really well-documented phenomenon called groupthink, right? Which is where you're in a group, you're in a team working on something, and because you really want to agree with each other, which is a hardwired human need, like we're herd animals, it's part of our survival and natural selection to want to get along with each other and want to be accepted. You start agreeing with things, and no one wants to be the person who says, oh, no, actually, no one wants to be the kind of Debbie Downer who's saying, I don't think that's a good idea. And there's actually a relatively new idea, which is group feel, which is the same kind of thing. And they talk about quite extreme examples like cults or investment banks. I don't know if you've seen industry, that's kind of all I know about investment banking, where it's the same thing. You can get so into wanting to feel in the same way and get excited that no one wants to be that person. But the interesting thing about good collaboration design is you can actually design around that. So, for example, you can get everyone to reflect on something individually before they come together so that the conversation isn't skewed by the person who goes first or the person who's the most senior or the loudest. You can have really intentional exercises where you're able to critique ideas robustly without challenging people as individuals. So it's interesting that they called it collaborative culture, and I see the idea, but I think you can, that's the kind of the genius of it. Like you actually can design around those constraints.
I think it's so important too, isn't it? Because I think sometimes, and in my experience, it's not even that the person doesn't want to say anything. It's that they're so ingrained in the culture that they're not even realizing that they actually don't agree or that they think a different way anymore because they've sort of been in that culture for such a long time. They haven't forced themselves out of it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It almost makes me think of, the Overton windows. So the idea that there's an acceptable window of potential policies in a country in a given time. It's almost like that in a company or in an organization. Like there's an accepted way of doing things. There's an accepted kind of dimension of what you can do at any given moment. And people are scared to challenge that. Like one of the things that I always think is quite useful is, if you're really trying to challenge that, is to kind of play with some of those assumptions. So to go to people and say, what if we assumed the exact opposite? Like we work in health insurance and everyone thinks this about health insurance. So what about if we assumed exactly the opposite? Like what would be true? And to actually document the assumptions in your industry or your organization and start to play with those, that can be a really useful part of collaboration design if you want to stretch people outside of their current mode of thinking.
I think that's so important. I mean, I'm going to start adopting that in my general conversations because I think sometimes people get so set in their ideas and their ways and, just not even open to a different way of thinking. I think AI almost comes in part of that too, right? Like there are so many polarizing views on AI in the workforce. Some people are very much like they're replacing all jobs and everyone's going to be on a universal basic income and no one's going to work anymore, all the way through to let's go back to our Nokia phones and disconnect from technology and everything in between. I'd love to know your thoughts on that because your work really focuses on the human side of work. What human skills do you think are going to become more valuable as AI continues to enable our future?
Firstly, I love that you call them human and not soft skills. That's exactly what I do. And I think what's really interesting, if you look at the World Economic Forum, for example, all of the skills that they're talking about in terms of future-proofing your career and how you can stay relevant in the next 5, 10, 15 years are all these human skills. So they're things like creative problem solving and collaboration and storytelling. All of these things that were not seen as desirable because ultimately, if you've got a technical skill and it's a single skill, single process, even if it can't now, we will be able to automate that. Like being able to do something faster or better or more efficiently is no longer differentiating. Yeah. Being able to do something that can only be done by a human, which is becoming a kind of smaller and smaller pool of things, is the only way that we can differentiate ourselves. So it's the only thing that we really should be focusing on, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think there are some things that will just stay so uniquely human. If you were someone who was in the workforce right now and perhaps your job is more process driven, even, for example, coding or software engineering that we know was really sought after and now a lot of it can be done by AI, what would you be telling those people to reskill in?
So firstly, I think you can work with AI, right? So someone in that role could be really interrogating their current job and what they're doing and think about, okay, what's the stuff that could be automated that can save me time? And therefore, where can I best put my attention? And often if you are a skilled professional, it's really in judgment and in taste. Because the AI can kind of pop out all of this stuff, but you're the person who's got, the years or decades of experience to say, oh, actually, it needs to be slightly different. I need you to do a bit more of this, a bit more of that. So that you're almost working with them as if they're a colleague or a team. And at the same time, I would really double down on these human skills, really thinking about how you can work with others and what you can bring to the table. And also how you can be more adaptable. Like there's a futurist called Sonia Clarke who talks a lot about your adaptability quotient, your AQ, as being the next really important thing. And I really agree with that because the future is so unpredictable. Like I could tell you what I think about AI today, but it could be completely wrong. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not an expert. Even the experts don't know. All you can really do as an individual is to try and make yourself as resilient and adaptable as possible so that whatever comes, you're able to shift.
Yeah, I think so as well. And it makes us easier to work with too. When we are adaptable to change, I think one of the most underrated skills is being easy to work with. And I'm not saying that in the sense of always agreeing. I think it's really important to challenge, but being adaptable to change makes us a lot easier to work with. And I think that's a very underrated skill in business personally.
Yes, I totally agree. And to your earlier point, I think being easy to work with is also going to be quite important.
Yeah.
As the workforce shrinks, right? Like that's important. People want to do business with people that they like, ultimately.
I agree with you. Yeah, completely. You've worked across multiple industries, PR, consulting, future of work, you do facilitation, you're trained in yoga and meditation. And on the surface, when you sort of look across all of those, they seem quite disparate. What do you think are the threads that really connect all those elements of your career?
I think I've always been interested in people and why they do what they do. I studied social sciences at university, so I studied kind of history and politics and some philosophy and economics. I always had that interest, and that played through into, how the media works and how people consume media and what that means and how businesses work and how people show up. And I think it all naturally has come together in this idea of how should people be working and how can you get the best out of them. And that's where funnily enough, the yoga and meditation were never intended to be complementary to that. It was very much, I didn't even intend to teach yoga when I did the training, but I've been surprised by how much they overlap and actually how beneficial it's been to have both. Like that has really almost shocked me, actually.
I think they're an insight into the human condition, and I think you would see, work is very human and, the challenges, the positives at work are all usually innately human. And I think that yoga and meditation sort of come in at the real basis of the way that humans operate. So I agree. I think it's funny. I spoke to someone the other day and I said, how do you connect neuroscience and sort of meditation particularly? And they had a great take on it that neuroscience is just catching up with the ancient philosophy of meditation. Like it's always been there and the benefits always been there. It's just the science is catching up now.
100%. I teach storytelling to leaders, and we talk about this all the time. Neuroscience for the last 20 or 30 years has caught up with what indigenous cultures have known for literally millennia.
Yeah. It's
but
so
now we've
funny.
Proved it.
Well, and it almost takes that for people to believe in it, which is so wild rather than just actually trying it. They want the science to prove it, but we've got millennia of people doing it and showing that it's worked. So I think that's just a fascinating insight into the way our human brains work anyway.
It's really interesting because, to your point, I think people think about the benefits of yoga and meditation because that's how we think about things in the West. I eat less, I lose weight. I do meditation, I'm more able to focus, I'm calmer, I can deal with stress. But there's really a layer underneath that, which is that it's a way of understanding yourself more, of kind of building a relationship with yourself. And I think if you have that more in yourself, you're more able to create that environment for others, whether that be in a workshop, for a team, anything else. We talk a lot about psychological safety. I do think that's a way in. I would obviously recommend that everyone do it, but I'm not going to push my own views.
Well, I think it's a really pertinent point, actually. And, I think if we think about, self-awareness and the importance of self-awareness on the way that we work as well, I want to touch a little bit on collaboration because I do think many leaders say they value or want collaboration, but often, and my experience I've seen in the past, is that their behaviors or the culture that they create within the team is almost discouraging collaboration. What do you think are some of the barriers that you see that prevent collaboration in teams?
I think you nailed it even with how you framed the question, because every organization has its stated culture that it's trying to achieve, right? Its values and behaviors. And I can't think of an organization that I've worked with that hasn't had something around collaboration or working together as its value. And it's what people actually see in terms of how they show up to work and how they're treated at work, which makes the difference. So, for an example, you may have a value that's about working together, but if all of your performance metrics and financial incentives are skewed towards individual performance or even small team performance, obviously that's what people are going to respond to, because that's what they see happening in reality. You know, they're told to work together, but they get to the end of the year and the stuff that's important is the stuff that's individual. I worked in an organization where the partners were told to work together, but they all had individual P&Ls. So obviously they're incentivized to be working on that and not working together. So I think it's partly lining up everything to the culture that you want to create. And also the tone from the top is so important. You know, people respond to what they actually see in reality, and they'll respond to what they see their leaders doing. And that's what they are going to follow rather than, you know, whatever's written down on the wall.
Yeah. How do you encourage, say you've got a leader who's a middle management leader where they might not see collaboration from the top, the incentive structure, the performance structures are not sort of geared towards collaboration. How do you think a leader at that level can actually still incorporate collaboration in their team despite the structures around them not being set up for that?
Oh, it's totally a choice. I mean, ultimately you have the formal and the informal incentives and levers in an organization, right? And so even if the formal structures are not set up for it, you can, as a middle management leader, be creating the informal network and the relationships to be collaborating across your level. And you can be creating that culture for and encouraging your team. And I think what often happens in organizations is when one group or one team starts doing well because they're trying something different, everyone gets a bit of FOMO and they want some of that. You know, we used to say that a lot with ways of working transformations. Don't go in and try and make everyone do work in a different way all at once, because it's not going to work and it's going to be really frustrating. But if you go to the pockets of where people are curious and start making a success out of those, it's organically going to grow. It's that kind of social proof, like basic behavioral economics stuff, which really works a lot more than just being told to do something.
Yeah, it's so there's nothing like, particularly in a competitive environment, which many organizations are, looking at the team next to you and seeing them be successful doing something and thinking, oh, how do I do that? I need to be doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds so basic, but it's probably one of the number one things that I've seen work over the years in lots of different organizational contexts.
I think it's a really good insight into even how to manage change within a team, right? Like, or particularly in a larger business, is focus on one small group, particularly an influential group, and then it will naturally sort of come through. I think, you know, you've spent years helping organizations navigate change. What do you think the teams that thrive do differently from those that struggle?
I'd say number one would be being aligned around a really clear North Star. So, which often comes from really good leadership. So really having buy-in from people about where they're going, even if they don't always know the what and the how, because that's shifting all the time. Having a really clear direction, I think, is really important. And to that note, being really open and honest about the unknowns and the ambiguity. Like I've had a lot of clients who are leaders who are kind of saying, oh, we don't know everything yet, so I don't want to go and communicate because, you know, there's this and there's this. But the problem is, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. An information vacuum will just get filled, and it will get filled by the most negative content that you can imagine. It's so much more compelling to people and effective to go out and say, look, this is where we're going. This is the stuff that we don't know. We know that there's uncertainty, but this is our commitment to you, and this is kind of how we're going to get there. That really brings people on the journey. And the other thing I would say is, and this might be a bit more personal to me and the teams that I've worked on, I do think having a sense of fun and play when you are navigating change and navigating kind of stress and pulling together can be really important, because it is difficult and you need tools to support you. If everything's just always serious and hard, I think you get the fatigue a lot quicker, and there's so much change fatigue in organizations at the moment. I think it's really overwhelming for them.
I think you have just nailed particularly the fun piece, and I think a lot of businesses are missing that. I think somewhere along the line, everything got really serious and everyone started to take themselves really seriously. And if you had fun, then maybe you weren't serious about your job. And I actually think it's the opposite. The more you can bring fun in, I think it opens up to creativity and people perform better, they're more engaged. How do you help teams do that? Because I don't know, I'm reflecting back, and I suppose I worked in financial services. When I worked in travel in HR, there was a lot of fun had in that industry, let me tell you. Yeah. But, I think sometimes people lose the ability to have fun. How do you help organizations build that into change?
I think a lot of it is tone from the top and also providing people with space. Esther Perel talks about this, and I think it's really interesting. She talks about everyone being remote now, and I'm definitely not an advocate for everyone back into the office all the time, like absolutely not. But what she talks about is you've lost some of those moments of joy and almost relational intelligence, because you don't have those kind of jokes before a meeting and walking around and spending time together in the same way. You don't know as much about your colleagues as you did. And there's research from Microsoft that shows that meetings are becoming more transactional, since the remote meetings are more transactional than in-person ones. But that's not a death sentence. I mean, you just have to design around that. You have to be really explicit, and leaders role modeling that makes a really big difference. Like when I've been on those kind of teams where the leaders are creating space to have fun, where they're making jokes, where they're softening the tone when it's all getting a bit serious, people really respond to that and they realize that it's a rewarded behavior. So yeah, a lot of it comes down to that, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. My husband's a big one on this. He's very relational, and he says a lot. People will jump into a Teams meeting and they're straight to business, and he always stops them and he says, "How are you today? What's going on for you?" And he'll always stop and have some sort of connection like you would in person. But I agree with you. Everything has become much more transactional, and he's very steadfast on making sure that there is some point at which there is a relational connection, even if it is a virtual meeting. I think the world certainly feels, increasingly connected digitally, which definitely has some benefits, but often it means people are more disconnected personally to that point. What do you think individuals can do to build deeper, meaningful relationships at work, particularly when they're in that hybrid or remote environment?
It's just spending the time, because I think people think about the tasks as the work, but actually building relationships is part of your work, and building relationships underpins the really good things that you get done. So taking the time to get to know people, there's MIT talks about the collective intelligence of teams. They basically did research across so many different teams, like sports, politics, business, music, anything you could think of. And they found 3 things come up again and again. And one of them is knowing the mind of others. So it's just understanding the people around you. And you only really get that from spending time getting to know them. And obviously you can do that virtually. I mean, you and I first met virtually, but I think our first call, we didn't really talk about work, even though we have very aligned work. We do kind of very complementary things. We actually just got to know each other as people and what we were interested in and what drove us. But that then underpins working together down the track, because you have that understanding of what makes each other tick. Maybe something about, the vulnerabilities, the strengths, weaknesses. And again, I think so much of it comes down to role modeling. If you're showing that you're able to be a bit vulnerable and to share a bit, 99 times out of 100 people will share back. And it's those relationships that form the basis of really good teams, but also making people happier at work.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are really unhappy at work and really lonely, actually.
And helping people be seen. I think that's why people feel lonely, is because they don't actually feel seen as themselves, an individual, perhaps just as someone who does tasks or whatever that may be. They're not feeling understood or seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are the other two things that MIT said in the research? So you've got that understanding the mind.
Yeah. So it's knowing the mind of others, diversity. And diversity, that's not necessarily just gender and cultural background and socioeconomic, although obviously it is. It's really just diversity of perspectives. And then the third one is equal turn taking, which is super interesting. So I always think that's a really good measure of the health of a team, if they are almost facilitating themselves. So noticing that someone maybe hasn't spoken much and giving them space. That's the other thing about knowing the mind of others. If you know the mind of others, you might know that someone's a bit more introverted, or they just need a bit more time to formulate their responses. And so maybe, you know, for that person, they need to have maybe they need some advance warning of what you're talking about in a meeting, so that they can really have a think about it. Maybe they need a different way to share, so that they don't feel like they're just stood up and, you know, talking in front of 15 people. It's all quite basic stuff. It's kind of funny, a lot of this research, and you hear and you go, oh, actually that is quite obvious. But to your point, it's kind of like the neuroscience of meditation and yoga. It just reassures people that they are doing the right thing, and that you don't have to just be task oriented. You know, we're not just working in factories anymore. You're not measured by how many widgets you can produce in a day. Like, what you're producing is much less tangible, and creating the conditions for that is more complex.
I think it's so interesting because simple, not easy, because a lot of teams don't do it. They don't take the time to do it. The loud person is still the one talking all the time without making space or awareness of the other person. And I think more and more what I've noticed is people listen with the intent to respond. So they're continuously just thinking about what their response is, rather than really hearing the person for what they're saying, making an opportunity. Hey, I know Sonia's recently gone through this. Sonia, what are your thoughts on this? Or do you want to take note and come back to us if you're someone who likes to reflect? And I feel like we've lost that art a little bit. I don't know. What's your perspective on that?
I really agree. I actually started a session recently, and this again is talking about taking things from yoga and meditation over, where I got people to share in pairs on a particular topic. But the instruction I gave them was, you're going to take turns. You're each going to have 2 minutes, and the other person is not going to say anything. Like, not even any clarifying questions, no response. They're just going to listen. And it was so interesting. People find it deeply, deeply uncomfortable. And if you know you can't talk and you're not trying to formulate a response, you actually do listen. So we then took that through the rest of the day. And at the end, everyone said, oh, we actually did listen more. That was really interesting, kind of framing that up for people. So there's definitely ways to start thinking about it. But yeah, there's a lot of everyone just trying to get their point across.
Or be distracted. I think too, a lot of people are so I reflect back to my time in some of the meetings I would sit in. I wasn't even listening, Sonia. I was there. I had so many emails. I was like writing emails. I was texting someone that I was going to be late for the next meeting. And I reflect back and I think, what a waste of time, because I wasn't even, what's the point in me sitting in there when I'm not actually taking in the information, helping to guide a really good outcome or decision? And I think that's true of many meetings and times when people are together. Everyone's so rushed that they're lacking the presence to really solve things. But I think it's actually costing decision-making, better outcomes in the long run. And things are just sort of, they just take so much longer because people haven't been present. Do you see that? Or
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And it's also it's really interesting. I think there's this behavior that's rewarded now in corporates of immediate response, like immediate response shows that you're working harder, when we have so much great research, and we know ourselves, just looking at ourselves, that we need deep focus time. Like every time you get distracted, you're off. I can't remember the number. You're off track for like 20 minutes or something.
23 minutes, the research says.
Yes, that's it. I worked, one of the leaders I worked with in my old corporate job was so good at doing the opposite. He would just be in a meeting with a notebook and a pen. Everyone else is kind of doing their emails and everything else. And he would be so present, and it really stood out, and it would start to make everyone else more present. He wouldn't tell people to do anything. He would just be really focused, and he was great, and he remembered everything. And he could see when something was going off track because he was actually focused and paying attention. Whereas I think a lot of people are kind of just jumping through meetings, kind of 50% on, 50% off.
I agree with you. Responsiveness is really rewarded. And what I learned over my time leading is as well, when you're overly responsive as a leader, you don't allow that person to try and solve the problem for themselves either. So what I actually learned was to not respond straight away to my team, to allow them to take some time to resolve the problem themselves. And I honestly think 9 times out of 10, when I'd come back to them and say, I'm just coming back to you, they're like, oh, I've already solved it. And so you're allowing them to also problem solve, which is better for them in the long run too.
It's also about trust, right? Like I remember there was someone on my team who was excellent, so smart, and you would give her a task and she would just go offline, like AWOL for a couple of days. And the first couple of times she did it, I'm there going, oh, this is due tomorrow. And then she would just reemerge when the deadline was due with this really great piece of work that was much more, she could accomplish so much in a day or two because she would literally just ignore her emails, ignore all her chats, like everything. Just
I love
go.
that she did that. That is amazing.
Yeah. Which I think people, and so because we had that trust, beyond that, I was like, okay, I know what she's doing. But she'd sometimes be working for someone else and they'd be calling me in a panic. She's gone missing. I said, don't worry. She'll be back.
But just not, people aren't used to it. And I suppose if it's someone who hasn't worked with her before, that trust hasn't been developed to know that, she was going to deliver. I want to talk to you a little bit about the collective code and this book that you are sort of looking to write. Talk to me about what inspired you to want to start writing it and what is the central idea that you're hoping to have people take away.
It was really interesting. I started to get really interested in a couple of concurrent trends. So more and more people working for themselves, really big crisis in loneliness, and this rise in technology, which was making the need to be more human and bring together human perspectives increasingly urgent. So I had this bubbling away, and I also had bubbling away that I've been working in collaboration design for, 2 decades. And it's not well known. If you even tell people that's what you do, it's not even very well known as a discipline. And I just thought, there might be an opportunity to democratize some of these principles. They're not just sat in high-end consulting firms and people have more access to them, because I think it's really important. So I started to go down this rabbit hole and diving into the research and interviewing people. And it was incredibly interesting. The more and more I interview people working in collectives, so people with individual business, but who had come together in really interesting ways, the more and more I became convinced that this is a really important trend in work. And so really the intent of the book is to provide people with a roadmap for there is another way of working. You don't have to be an employee in a company or just be a lonely freelancer. There is a way that you can come together in kind of new and inventive ways and have happier, healthier work. And I also think the more that people can learn to collaborate better, because it's been whittled away, I think, this ability. We're living in a very individualistic society and way of working. I think it's just better for the world, like in terms of problem solving, in terms of feeling human and feeling kind of related to each other. And the other thing that I think is really interesting is we look at the way we work and we're like, oh, this is how we've always worked. We can't change it.
Yeah.
But the way we work is less than 200 years old. You know,
and also
the
not
way we
based
work,
on knowledge work either. It's actually not based on
totally.
what we do
The way
now.
we work is based on what factories needed, like a combination of kind of the Industrial Revolution and the social movements that accompanied it, that meant that we then got a weekend and, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of sleep. So you could fit 3 shifts into a factory and also see how it's like that kind of thing. And that just became the way that we worked. And then all of this technology came in over the past 50 years, and that was just kind of stuck on top. So now you have your 8-hour day, but you're actually meant to be contactable for about 22. And when you look back at pre-industrial revolution times and the way that people worked in guilds, for example, there's loads and loads of really good history around kind of good precedents around people working in different ways, people having independence and autonomy and mastery in a skill, but coming together on these really amazing projects, building cathedrals. Like the people who were building cathedrals hundreds of years ago were kind of like the people who ran banks or consulting firms now. Like they were the most skilled people that existed in a community. They were the people that everyone looked up to. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from looking back. I told you I was a history nerd at the beginning of this. Looking back, but also looking at the circumstances in which we find ourselves and not taking them as a necessity. Like that there is another way that we could work and live, I believe.
I think it's so interesting even just to challenge the way we work and people thinking that it's so outrageous to do so. But when you really think back on the history of work, the way we're working now actually makes no sense for the type of work that we're doing. Our brains aren't even set up to do 8 hours of deep work every day. It's just not even possible. That's just not the way we're designed to work. And so it's dysfunctional anyway. And so I think it's awesome that you're thinking about how we challenge this. I'd love to explore a bit more about the idea of collectives though, and trust in particular, and how people in collectives can build trust, because I think there is sometimes a bit of a feeling of, well, this is the client that I've developed a really strong relationship with, this is my reputation. How do you build trust in collectives to feel confident and comfortable in introducing those other people to a client that you've spent a long time, developing your relationship and reputation with?
I think there are informal and formal ways to do this. So we've talked a little bit about competition and this assumption of competition, which again is a relatively new concept. It's very much since the 80s, this idea that life, I guess, is a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. And you think about that in corporates, right? You basically put ranked and put on a bell curve at the end of the year. It's who does the best in exams. You're kind of trained to think, if I lose that client, someone else wins it. I think there is a way to think about things in a much more mutual way. Like if you believe that life is a positive sum game and there's plenty of work to go around for everyone, which I do believe, and you surround yourself with collaborators who also believe that, then for the vast majority of the time, it's going to work. Like you can introduce a client, the good stuff will come back to you. So I do... Probably sounds a little bit Pollyanna, but I genuinely believe that. And I also think that this whole idea that humans are inherently, and the natural environment is inherently at odds with each other, it's just not true. Natural ecosystems are all about mutualism. Rutgers Brennan, I've probably pronounced that wrong, but who wrote Humankind, he talks a lot about this misconception in history that people are always in conflict with each other when actually it's not true. So that's one belief. The other way is obviously you can put structures around it. I spoke to a collective recently who work in big pharma. So they're all scientists who are ex-big pharma. And that's one of the most regulated industries in the world. Some of them are in the US, some of them are elsewhere. And they have this amazing model where they all have their own businesses. They have signed NDAs. They have really clear contracts with each other about, who brings in a piece of work. And then you have a particular payment structure based on having the others as subcontractors and the way that you think about that. So you can go from kind of all the way at my end of the spectrum, which is very much just I have trust in the people around me and working with people with the same values. And, 3 years in, that's worked really well for me. All the way up to you can there's lots of different ways that you can structure a collective.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, and I think it depends on probably the industry, the people, how well you know the people, all of that sort of thing. And I think it's kind of just like a team, really, at the end of the day. You just got to put time and effort into getting to know them. But I do think this is going to be a big part of the future of work. It's interesting. Some people say that there will not be a corporate structure anymore. What do you think about that? Do you think that, collectives will take over and sort of, individuals and portfolio careerists will take over? Or do you think it's going to land somewhere in the middle?
I think realistically it would have to land somewhere in the middle, just in terms of the capital markets and the way, unless we literally are saying that capitalism is going to collapse, which...
I mean, who knows what's going to happen?
Who knows? I've got a crystal ball. Things are pretty dicey at the moment. I also think that making any firm predictions about anything is a fool's errand at the moment.
I agree.
Which is kind of what I was saying before, making yourself as resilient and adaptable as possible is key. But again, that comes, if you think again about working in a collective or for yourself, and you're just talking then about taking on some risk there of maybe introducing people in and, losing a client relationship. But what about the risk of having 100% of your income and network focused on a single entity that can change your life tomorrow because a meeting goes in your diary with HR, which is happening to so many people every day at the moment. So I think that whole concept of a social contract, which I certainly grew up with, and I left university thinking of, you get a job and you work in it for 30 or 40 years like our parents did, and then you get a good pension and you retire, is just not the case anymore. So being open-minded to other ways of doing things is the only way. We can't go back. It's not possible.
Yeah, you can't close Pandora's box. I think it's open.
Yeah, exactly.
We're moving forward. But I agree too, the old adage of, and I mean, look, I started my career in HR, so I've sort of always known this from the start, but the old adage of like a secure job that, working for a corporation is going to be secure. I think, unfortunately, working in teams where you're delivering redundancies tells you that there's nothing that's ever secure and business decisions will always be made. But I think now more than ever, it's really clear that there is nothing that is secure. And so if that's the reason someone's doing it, then perhaps it's not the reason to do it. If you were advising a leader today on how to prepare their teams for the future of work, obviously we've talked about adaptability, but what do you think are the 3 most important things you tell them to focus on?
So definitely the adaptability piece and the development of the human skills. So being able to work together in productive ways. But I actually think there's a bigger question. There's something really interesting about teams and the demand of teams now, because your average team now has a combination of full-time people, part-time people, remote, hybrid, virtual, contract, offshore, and now AI / robots. And I don't think enough is being done to think about that. And I'm not going to present, the answer. I think you and I could probably work on that for the next 8 hours and barely scrape the sides. And it would be really unique to individual teams. But I think a leader that really wanted to future-proof themselves would be having a lot of reflection and conversations with their team about how they co-design an operating system that makes sense within that context. Because the alternative is that people will just get really burnt out. I don't think it's possible to keep going at the moment, navigating all of the uncertainty on a global level with climate change, with tech, with change fatigue for years over, we've both been in corporate a long time, multiple rounds of transformations. With everything that is going on, that eventually people will snap.
Yeah. Yeah,
There's no other way. I mean, this is your line of work, right? You see this every day.
Yeah, and people will just leave. People make a choice just to leave. And I think it's such a loss for teams and businesses that people do leave because they get to the point where they just snap. But I think you raised such an important point there around each leader of a team should actually be taking a step back and thinking, how has the construct of my team changed? How has the way of work changed? And how do I just take them out for half a day and say, hey, what's actually going to work for us? What can we experiment with? We might not get it right in this time that we're together, but let's just talk about it and try some things and see how we might change this to make it work for everyone better. And I guarantee if they did that, first of all, you build a hell of a lot of trust within that team, but you also help people feel like, oh, I've got some self-efficacy, my well-being's considered, and I'm able to make some change in the way that we work together.
Yeah, people need a degree of autonomy and they support what they help to create, right? It's the IKEA effect. So having some degree of control over how they're going to work going forward makes such a difference. And I was really struck by what you said when you were talking about people just leaving. People are leaving, but also a lot of the time it's women leaving.
Yeah.
Because of the care responsibilities and everything else. And I really worry about that and how that's shaping the workforce.
And I think too, something I worry about a lot, and it's not necessarily my domain, but is the financial independence of women as well. And that often is the thing that goes, because you're right, it is women leaving the workforce. And I am often thinking about, how women can remain financially independent, which is so important.
Yeah, completely agree.
When you think about your own definition of well-being, I always like to ask a well-being question of the guests and success today. How has your definition of well-being and success evolved from when you started your career through to what you would consider it now?
Oh my God. I don't think I would have even used the word well-being or thought about it for a second when I started work. I started my career in a PR agency in London. There was no well-being. There was work and the pub. And I think success to me would never have looked like what I was doing now. Success for me would have looked like a career ladder, moving up, getting promotions, big teams, big projects. Like I always cared about doing really good work and working with good people. That was always really important to me. But I definitely would have thought more about the trappings of going up the ladder. And now I can't even tell you how differently I feel about it. Success to me now is, do I have control over my time and what I do? And at the moment, I have complete control over my schedule by design. I can work on writing my book and combine that with my client work. I can be really available to my clients and really focus on them and then be doing other things outside. I can completely combine that with how I think about my own well-being. And I think that the thing about well-being for me is I've seen a lot of corporates say, oh, okay, well, we'll give you a yoga class once a week, which no one can go to because they've got no time, right? But, we were just talking about it before. So much of it actually comes down to having good boundaries and letting people have those boundaries so that people actually have time and space outside of work to spend time with their friends and family, do other things.
Yeah.
And so again, like having that control now has just been a complete game changer. And I think for me, success is also being able to meet interesting people and work on interesting projects. And I think I was lucky in my old job. I would meet amazing people all the time, but I think now I'm open to probably a lot more diverse people just by virtue of being a sole operator. You probably find the same thing.
Yeah.
Because you're much less bound by the organization and what exists within the organization. And you have to really go out and search for it yourself. And I talk about this all the time, actually, with other friends who've left corporate. I think we're always surprised. It was never something that we looked for, but we're so happy that it has organically turned out that way.
It's so true, isn't it? I would have never have imagined being here and doing this back at the start of my career. There's no way. But I'm glad
No.
it's panned out how it has. Well, where can everyone find you? And I love asking you this question because you are the least sort of social media person. But how can people find you if they feel like our team needs some of what Sonia has been talking about? Where can they find you?
Can I just say in my defense, so I have an app on my phone that cuts all my social media after 20 minutes a day.
Oh, that's great.
And my phone is on grayscale. So it makes Instagram really unappealing. So that's why I'm basically a boomer and spend no time on social media. So the best place would be my Substack, The Collective Code, because that's where I share a lot of what I'm thinking about on the book and interviews and kind of updates on that, or LinkedIn, or email or carrier pigeon.
We'll send you a letter.
Yeah. Oh my God. How amazing would that be? I'd love that. I'd love to bring back letters.
I love a handwritten letter. I have to say, this is a bit of a digression, but I love a handwritten letter because I just think there's so much time and effort that is put into like a card or a handwritten letter. Thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom today. There will be a lot of thought-provoking things for teams, for individuals, and we will keep an eye out for when that book gets released. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Ange. It's been really fun.
Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.